Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're gonna be reviewing Land Animal by the band Bent Knee.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
This album is quite an interesting one. I have a lot to say about it and I really want to get to it, but beforehand we have to talk about my favorite bits from this album.
Every time I see you, I love myself.
So sometimes on this list we get bands and albums that aren't really prog, and I don't mean all the neo prog albums that sound more like contemporary rock and metal rather than being progressive, but I mean albums that don't really fall under the prog category, although being very exquisite in various ways in the musical realm. Albums that you'd most normally find under the prog related subgenre over on the Prog Archives. Now speaking of the Prog Archives, they actually categorize today's album as being crossover prog, but I'd have to disagree with that, saying that it doesn't really have a lot to do with prog itself, and it's just one of those cases where the Prog Archives just generalizes one type of subcategorization per band, despite the fact that multiple albums of theirs might not sound like that subcategory. But don't get me wrong, this isn't an apple a day like it's your basic rock and it has some traces of psychedelia in it. This one is actually quite different, and I'd have to say that personally, if I had to describe what type of subgenre this album actually fits into, I'd have to say that it goes on some sort of synthesized baroque pop to avant-garde jazz. And if you don't know what these subcategories of music mean, don't worry, they're very obscure. It's really odd. I'm like trying to fit this type of music into something, but in all honesty, it's pretty hard. That's what she said. Now, Bent Knee are a band I actually never heard of before, but when I went to check them online, I saw that their guitarist is actually Ben Levin. Now, you might not know who Ben Levin is, but I do know who he is because I really like what he does over on YouTube and his collaborations with a fellow YouTuber called Adam Neely. And for anyone here who really likes music theory and a lot that has to do with, avant-garde and jazz-influenced music and some sort of prog, but not a lot about prog, then you might like what Adam Neely does over on his channel. Now, knowing a bit about Ben Levin and what he does on his channel and hearing some of his music that he made in the past at certain times, I could kind of anticipate what this album would sound like. And basically what this entire album comes down to is being music that really subverts expectations. So you have a lot of unusual things like unusual time signatures or using various instruments and sounds that are not quite common in most types of music, and overall having songs which don't really conform to any type of song structure. Now, as experimental and unique and very intricate music that they create on this album, we have to remember that a lot of bands do this and they really dance close to the line of making music that is special for trying to explore and express different musical ideas, and music that tries to be special for the sake of just being special. And as much as I hate saying this, I feel like throughout most of this album, this is exactly what the band were trying to do. They basically did special things and unique things and original things, not for the sake of sounding good, but for the sake of just doing things that are special. And I know that some people like this kind of stuff and they like really obscure types of music, but in my honest opinion, I think they should have stuck to some familiar things at least. But at the same time, I really like Zool music, so I don't really know where I'm getting at with this point. But if there's one thing that I really didn't like about this album, it's just the lack of instrumental expression. Yes, they played really pretty nice, but all in all, you really have just one person that really leads this album, and that has to be Courtney Swain on the vocals. She does most of what this album really has. She's the finesse of this album, and as much as I enjoyed her Amy Winehouse without the cigarettes voice, I kinda didn't really find it all that appealing, considering the fact that we didn't really get a lot of experimentation and instrumentation from the entire band. Needless to say, there are no instrumental pieces on this entire album, and instrumental sections usually last a few seconds, and if they last more than that, they're just basically the same thing repeating over and over again, and thus I really didn't like it. So yeah, this album advertises itself for being very original and very creative and very special, but at the same time, at least I find this album to be very try-harding and very pretentious. But saying this, I also know that this was the exact same criticism that critics used to review Prog as it started, and look where we are today. So in my honest opinion, I really can't tell you what this type of music might lead to in the future. But I guess my point is this album found their way on the list, but in all honesty, I don't really feel like they really fit inside of here. It's not that they're not progressive, you can definitely call this type of music progressive, although I would better go with experimental as the description, but I just feel like they kind of verge towards the outskirts of what's known to be progressive, and what they do really stretches the definition of what prog actually is. And seeing as we review prog on here, I feel obligated to tell you all that, and if any of you want to listen to this album, you can sure do that, but in my personal opinion, as someone who really likes progressive rock music, this doesn't tick any of my boxes. Yeah, this cover pretty much summarizes it quite well. I will admit that I did a pretty shit job at getting inside of the music found on this album. I don't even think I talked about any particular song, and I'm sorry for not doing that, but definitely I just kind of forgot them all, and they weren't really that special. That is to say, they weren't bad, but you know what? This cover kind of feels like what the album is, and it's got it covered. Pun intended. But I want to address a broader point while we're at it. I think that since we were introduced to Photoshop and digitally editing images, something about covers just really downgraded quite a bunch. There's something that's really not that exciting with modern day covers that use stuff that were entirely edited on a computer. There's just something very personal and very real and very human in some sense of using something that actually exists in real life as the image for your album. So stuff like photos, drawings, subjects, whatever, things that exist in real life really add a lot to how a cover looks and how people perceive it. Just look at this cover. It's pretty seamlessly edited. I get what they were trying to get at, but just look at it. There's really no personal touch about it. Imagine if they made this cover in real life and actually made a photo of it. They used the real hand, miniature figures, there's a painting in the background, used some sources of light, and recreated this cover in real life. Something about it, something about a photo of it just feels more human. There's something more intimate about it, and I think that it adds a lot to a cover, and we don't really get to see that a lot in today's covers, that we see that everything is basically digitally edited. I think one of the examples I can think of right now is Haken's Virus cover. It looks very much edited on Photoshop, and that's fine and all, but then they added like the scratches and marks on it, just overlaying it on top, and that made it all the more fake in my opinion. If a cover has scratches and stuff like that, that's because that's human error, and the only way of seeing real human error is by making something in real life and not on a computer. But I'm getting really off topic. I don't know if you got my point, but it just feels like I know what I want to say, but I really can't express it all that well. But anyway, let's move on to the rating. So this album isn't necessarily bad, I just do find that there's some glimpses of hope on it, but I wasn't really thrilled by it and I completely forgot what it sounded like. So it's getting a very understandable rating of 6 out of 10. You thought I was gonna say 5, didn't you? No, it does have some glimpses of hope. I really like the song Hold, for instance. It's really quite good. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're gonna be listening to A Storm Is Coming by Bjorn Reese. I of course want to thank my lovely supporter over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Walnum. You are the best. And if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.